Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. We're going to listen to a sample answer for TOEFL speaking question 1, and it's a pretty good answer. And we're going to see what we can learn from it, both the good and the bad, because I know many of you perhaps already have a template for answering this question, but maybe you are not aware of how the speaking is scored. And that's quite important because once you know how the speaking is scored, it can help you understand how to deliver your answer. So the speaking is scored using three important criteria. Okay. So the criteria used to score your speaking are delivery. So that includes things like your pronunciation, your intonation, and how fast you are speaking. The second point is language use. So that includes your vocabulary and your grammar. And the third point is topic development. This is, did you answer the question and how did you structure or organize your answer? Is it easy to follow? Okay, so why don't we listen to the sample answer now, and then afterwards we will discuss the sample answer.
Yeah, I think it was easier to eat healthy food back in the day compared to now. Well, first of all, people in this generation are exposed to different unhealthy snacks just like junk food, oily foods, fast food, and sweets. And these snacks weren't even present back in the day. Most of the food they ate 40 years ago were healthy and also great for the body. Secondly, it is really hard to find fresh foods nowadays. Unlike before, where you can just get food from the trees, like fruits, or we could just plant whatever kind of food that we would like to eat. Unfortunately, today, the trees have turned into buildings, and the places where we want to plant have become roads.
So as I said at the beginning, her answer is pretty good, and here is why. So let's begin with her delivery. Now, delivery includes three important things. The first one is pace. Okay, so pace means how fast someone is speaking. Are they speaking very quickly, or are they speaking very, very slowly? Or are they speaking at a more natural pace for a speaker? Now, of course, everyone is different, so there will be differences in how people speak, but there is kind of a natural way to speak. And listening to her answer, she speaks at a natural pace. In other words, you're not struggling to understand her because she's talking too fast or too slow. You can understand and hear every single word that she says. So that's very good. The second thing with pacing is that she pauses at important places. Okay. So, for example, before she introduces her first point, she pauses. And before she moves on to her second point, she also pauses. And these are slightly longer pauses. And in her answer, as she's given the answer, she also pauses at the appropriate places, as you can see on the screen. Now, the other two things to bear in mind for delivery are pronunciation and intonation. So what this means is it doesn't mean that you can't have an accent from whatever country you're from. What it means is your accent doesn't interfere with you being understood. And with our example, although she's from Thailand, we can still understand her easily. Although she doesn't have a British accent or American accent, we can understand her easily. So pronunciation is good, and her intonation is also very natural. The next point to talk about is her topic development. Again, this is very good. And the reason we can say it's good is because we clearly know what her 2 points of view are. She mentions that today people are exposed to unhealthy food, and she also mentions that in the past it was easier to get access to healthier foods. So those two things are the reasons why she's of the opinion that it's actually harder to eat healthy today. So those points are very clear, and she develops them in a logical manner. Now, one thing you probably notice is that she didn't give a personal example. Okay. Now, it's important to mention this. It is a good idea to give a personal example, but it isn't necessary. So the reason why it's a good idea to give a personal example is because it's usually easier to think of a personal example for many people, not everyone, but for many people, than it is to try and explain their ideas with a lot of detail. So if you're one of those people who can think of a personal example, then use that. If you find it easier to explain with detail, then you don't need to include a personal example. Now, the next point is in terms of her language use. Remember, that has two parts. First of all, vocabulary, and then secondly, grammar. Vocabulary, there's no problem. She uses very simple words, which is fine, and the words she uses are appropriate. For example, she describes snacks as unhealthy snacks. She says junk food, oily food. Okay, so she's using the right vocabulary. Notice how she begins by paraphrasing the statement in the question. She doesn't just repeat it the same as it is written, she says it in her own words. So that's a good point to remember. If you want to get good marks on vocabulary, always try and express the question in your own words rather than repeating it exactly as it appears on the screen. The problem for her is some of her grammar. So, for example, you can see here in red, she is talking about the present in comparison to the past. And yet, when talking about the past, she still uses the present simple. So that's a mistake on her part. So here, instead of saying where you can just get food from the trees, she should have said where you could, referring to the past. Okay, so that was a mistake. And then her final sentence also sounds a bit strange. She says, unfortunately, today the trees have turned into buildings. Now, we kind of know what she means, but perhaps she could have phrased it better. Maybe a better way to phrase this would be, now these areas where trees would have grown now have buildings, okay? And the places where we want to plant have become roads, okay? Again, with grammar, perhaps a better way to phrase it is, the places where we could have planted have now become roads. Okay, that would have been a more natural way to phrase it. But here's the important point. Even though her grammar lets her down a little bit, this is still a very high level answer. So one thing to bear in mind, although I mentioned that you are scored on the three rubrics, which is delivery, language use, and topic development, they are not scored separately. They are scored holistically. In other words, how do they all work together to make a good answer? So if you look at the general description, notice what it says here, that it mentions that the answer is highly intelligible. That means it's easy to understand. And it is sustained and it is coherent. So in other words, as long as we can understand someone fully without being confused by any grammar mistakes or vocabulary mistakes or pronunciation, they can still get a very high score. So that is why, even though she made these grammar mistakes, she could still score 26 in her speaking. So I hope this was insightful. If it was, guys, please like. Please also subscribe to the channel, because this allows me to take the time to make more free content that can help you with your TOEFL answers. And finally, leave a comment down below regarding the answer you heard. What is your opinion? Do you think her answer was really good, or did you think it wasn't so good? And tell me the reason why. Okay, so hopefully we'll see you next video.